You are listening to a Difference for One podcast, episode number 25.
I'm Michelle.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Charisse.
And I'm Cami.
We are the English sisters.
We come together to share life-changing methods of improvement through a variety of topics.
We hope that above all, these discussions will help you feel that Jesus Christ is making a difference for you, the one. And we also hope that our podcast will inspire you to find simple ways that you can make a difference for one.
Hey guys, this is Cami back with another episode about healthy sexuality. If you missed the last one, go back to episode 18 and listen there because I think that one provides a good foundation moving forward. So today I am going to continue talking mostly about this topic as it pertains to teaching children. And I want to let it be known again that a lot of the information I know comes from resources taught by Shalom Levitt, who I will link in the description. Now, I want to start off by talking about how parenting is different for different children. As I said before, making the conversation a very regular one rather than a one-time event is probably the most important thing. But I want to add that it's important to make it an individual thing. Tailor those conversations to the personality of your child. Think about their curiosity level in general. Think about how they respond to situations that make them uncomfortable, things like that. And it might also be a good idea to incorporate different settings. Maybe sometimes it's a conversation with just you, maybe some with the parents and some of the older kids, maybe some with the whole family and some with just dad. If you have a child that feels extremely uncomfortable talking about these things, no matter what the situation is, you can be sensitive to that and not force them into things, but you can ease them into it and make sure that it's still talked about. You can acknowledge the way that they feel and adjust to them, but you do still get to set the parameters as the adult. A lot of times if parents recognize that their child hates talking about it, they'll just completely back away because it is a touchy subject. But maybe you could try to figure out or understand why it makes them uncomfortable, which could help you get to the root of it. You could come up with creative ways maybe to approach it, like talking about body image in general, helping them open up about what their friends are talking about at school, maybe talking about what they imagine marriage to be like in the future, things like that. So get creative. You are their parent and you're really the best person to receive inspiration on how to talk to them and help them through this process. So don't be afraid to pray and ask for guidance in this area. You can even ask them their preferences, talk to them about what's working or not working with those conversations, and ask about maybe what setting makes them most comfortable to open up about things. Be honest with them and let them know that you don't have the answer to everything, but if you don't know the answer, you'll figure it out. And don't forget to let them know frequently that although it's not a secret, it is something that we want to treat with respect, so it's best to not talk about it in depth with friends. Let them know that they can keep it between them and you as the parents and help them to see the bigger picture. You can let them know that you welcome their questions, but because it's so special, we don't talk about it carelessly or flippantly. You can talk to them about brain development and hormones and how everyone their age is experiencing the same things as them at that stage, so it's hard to see past that narrow view. And you probably wouldn't want to talk about their friends as if they're dumb because that's likely to be an instant turnoff. But because you are in a different stage of life, you have different knowledge and experience that is unique. And maybe even reflect back on your own life at those stages and try to connect with them on their level rather than just as a parent disciplining a child. Try to discuss it with a positive tone. If you are having a conversation with them about caution and rules, be sure to make that a completely separate conversation. If you lay down the law so much in the same conversation that they're asking lots of questions or confiding in you, it could close those discussions for them. You can shift away from the risk and danger mindset towards instilling responsibility and joy. You want to engage their curiosity, not their fear.
We'll be back after this quick break with a message from our sponsors.
Now, when it comes to puberty, when your children are young, you can ask them things like how mom and dad's bodies are different from theirs. That will get their gears turning in their minds, and you can ask why they think they look different. Since they've already been making those connections all along, it may not come as such a big shock when their own bodies start changing. And puberty is something to celebrate and enjoy, not be ashamed of. So make sure that they know that. Some other things to incorporate in conversations as they're growing up. Make sure that they really understand their own anatomy. When boys are little, they're told what their penis is, and because it is an external body part, boys are more likely to understand that part of their body better because they see it all the time and they're constantly reminded of it. Girls, on the other hand, their sex organs are mostly internal, so it's much easier not to talk about it. Or when they are told about it, they're often mistold by learning that the entire thing is their vagina rather than their vulva, things like that. So the vocabulary of the anatomy is important so as not to contribute to any confusion there. And I really think that giving a name to things for children is like gold. Along with that, be sure to include learning about both men's and women's bodies. A lot of people don't feel like it's important to teach their sons about the details of women's anatomy or teach women the details of men's anatomy, but it is so important that you talk to your sons frequently about the opposite sex and vice versa for daughters, and not have it be a one-time conversation. I really believe that this would create a more wholesome experience in so many more marriages if both partners go into the relationship having a solid foundation about each other, not just about themselves and their own bodies. And I want to include that God doesn't want us to have a template before getting married for what should happen in those private moments within marriage. Having a solid foundation is so important, but be careful not to limit their minds to the possibilities. Because part of the struggle with the lack of talking about this subject is that no one has any idea what is okay and what isn't within a marriage, and sometimes parents think it's their job to explain those things. But the beautiful part is that a married couple gets to create their own unique experience that is unlike anyone else's. That's part of the reason it can be very dangerous to talk to others about the specifics of what goes on in your relationship. Children should grow up learning and go into marriages knowing that there isn't one right way to do things. There isn't one right position or location or whatever else the world might try to impose on someone. And that's also part of the reason why pornography is so dangerous, because it gives people preconceived ideas rather than allowing couples to get creative and use each other as a springboard in order to make the best relationship possible for the two of them. Reserving sexual expression for marriage also gives us time to emotionally develop and maintain safe and appropriate boundaries for ourselves. Another great thing to include is to give a much broader definition of sexuality to include all types of connection and intimacy. There are so many ways to bond and have a special experience. I think this can help create a more well-rounded understanding of the purpose of any intimacy. Love isn't created by having sex. Sex or other intimate experiences are an expression of love. They're an expression of love for one another and an expression of love for God. You could talk to them about different degrees of intimacy. Hugging, as an example, is an act of intimacy between any two people. And intimacy is the goal in family relationships, like family relationships with children or siblings. And it's also the goal in really a lot of relationships, but especially for a future sexual relationship. But they are in different contexts and in different degrees. So be sure to point out that within a marital relationship, sex does not equal intimacy. Orgasm does not equal intimacy. Sexual intercourse is not the same as sexual intimacy. There are really infinite ways to be intimate without having to hold yourself to any expectations or standards of what it should look like. Now, going back to helping children understand their bodies and their feelings, especially as they're starting into puberty and experiencing feelings they hadn't had before, you can work to bring the conversation into their daily lives. So one example that we were given in class is maybe if you see a scantily dressed woman on a billboard, you could pose the question, how do you think that makes women feel? And think of strategies you can use so that it doesn't have a negative impact, because the goal is not to create any shame. Or maybe instead you could talk to them about how the billboard made them feel. If you can help them to recognize when they're feeling arousal, You can assist them in being mindful of their bodies and in learning self-mastery over those feelings. They can make progress in identifying and expressing and understanding emotions and arousal during comfortable conversations. And it's probably a good idea to keep the two conversations separate, those of talking about the normal process of arousal and separately talking about not shaming other people for their choices in dress or in other things. Now, in order to help them control their impulses, you could pose general questions like, if someone is aroused, do they need to act or can it be controlled? Is that possible? And what prompts arousal? What are the physical signs for both boys and girls? Teach them to recognize pleasurable and arousing feelings and learn to control them through spiritual awareness and discipline. Teach them about meditation. We can slow down and sit with something. We can notice it without acting on it. And it's important to also teach them to be non-judgmental with themselves, which, don't forget, starts with being non-judgmental towards yourself. The main goal is for us to teach children to appreciate and love all aspects of their bodies as a beautiful gift from God. Teach them that we use our body for kindness in all ways. We don't hurt people with our body physically, like hitting someone, but we also don't use our bodies to hurt others in other ways. We respect others' boundaries. My sister Charisse actually teaches her children to respect boundaries in the way that they play. So when she's having a tickle fight with them and they say stop, she stops. And then she waits for them to say go again before tickling them. I totally think that that will translate over into how they allow themselves to be treated as they grow older, because they understand that they shouldn't tolerate when others don't respect the boundaries that they've set for themselves. One thing I also wanted to touch on in this episode is fragmentation. And this quote comes from Victor L. Brown Jr. He says, "Fragmentation enables its users to counterfeit intimacy. If we relate to each other in fragments, at best, we miss full relationships. At worst, we manipulate and exploit others for our gratification. Sexual fragmentation can be particularly harmful because it gives powerful physiological rewards, which, though illusory, can temporarily persuade us to overlook the serious deficits in the overall relationship. Two people may marry for physical gratification and then discover that the illusion of union collapses under the weight of intellectual, social, and spiritual incompatibilities. Sexual fragmentation is particularly harmful because it's particularly deceptive. The intense human intimacy that should be enjoyed in and symbolized by sexual union is counterfeited by sensual episodes which suggest but cannot deliver acceptance, understanding, and love. Such encounters mistake the end for the means, as lonely, desperate people seek a common denominator which will permit the easiest, quickest gratification." End quote. So fragmentation comes from internal threats. For example, thinking something like, I can be spiritual or I can be sexual. Some external beliefs that lead to fragmentation are that sexual chemistry is crucial and that things need to be tested out to be sure of compatibility before marriage. It's so important to emphasize that the foundation of a relationship cannot be sexuality. Your body is going to go through so many changes as the years go by. There has to be a secure foundation built on more than that. You could also point out to your children some of the vast research that is out there about how satisfaction and communication are better when you wait until after marriage to have sex. Also, learning restraint before marriage will prepare them for marriage when restraint and sacrifice are often necessary. It could be beneficial to journal about maybe what your own fragmentation mentalities might be. Maybe reflect on where in your life you could use more discipline and indulge in less instant gratification. True learning takes place when a child's or a person's existing thoughts are challenged, and you can't allow for fragmentation in your life and in your home. So based on the research presented in the class I took, in one study it showed the reasons why a small subset of individuals restrained their impulses. So the reasons they restrained were either that they had a clear connection to God and parents, they learned the benefit of delaying gratification, they had a lack of opportunity, there were negative repercussions spiritually or socially, or that there was a lack of confidence or high anxiety. So obviously you can see that some of those are more positive than others, but in order to make sure that your children restrain their impulses for the right reasons, you have to teach them about connection to God. Teaching abstinence without other scaffolding isn't effective. So help them understand that love within the right context is freedom. There's no either or. And I will just end with some final thoughts to wrap things up. Conception is a metaphor, and I loved thinking about this. I loved learning that life is the embodiment of the love of two beings into one new organism. And I also loved learning that each individual includes aspects of at least 5 beings: Heavenly Mother, Heavenly Father, you as an intelligence, your earthly mother, and your earthly father. Not that sex and intimacy are only for the purpose of creating children, because that's definitely not the case. But if that isn't a beautiful bond, I don't know what is. In the August Ensign that was just released, Dr. Padilla Walker wrote an article in it that is perfect and has all of the information that I have talked about in these last 2 episodes wrapped up in a little nutshell. She is a professor at BYU and is one of the co-authors, along with Shalom Levitt, of the book that I pull from called A Better Way to Teach Kids About Sex. She said in the Ensign, just as when our toddlers are first learning how to walk, youth may stumble as they learn to understand and regulate their own sexuality. It's important for us to remember to promote growth instead of guilt, and to teach children that Jesus Christ can bless them with grace and power and mercy to strengthen them and help them remain sexually pure and one day enjoy the blessings of sexual intimacy in marriage. Being a parent is not easy, and our efforts in teaching our children may not always be perfect, but we can do our best to teach our children about the beautiful gift that is sexual intimacy in marriage. If we feel that we fall short, we can do better with the Lord's help. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles said, "With the gift of the atonement of Jesus Christ and the strength of heaven to help us, we can improve. And the great thing about the gospel is we get credit for trying even if we don't always succeed." End quote. I loved what she had to say in this article, and especially with this quote. I know that our efforts do not go unappreciated or unnoticed. I have full confidence that you are the best parent for your child, and you will be a great resource for them to have a wholesome understanding about such an important topic. But don't feel overwhelmed with such a seemingly daunting task. Start small, and as you learn and practice, hopefully you'll feel more comfortable as time goes on. Even though I'm just a kid, I appreciate you guys sticking around, and I hope that I can contribute to more conversations about this in the future. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Talk to you next time. Bye.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If it resonates with you, the greatest compliment you could give is to share it with a friend who might benefit from it as well. Check out A Difference for One on Instagram for additional content. And if you have any questions, comments, a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you'd be interested in a free mini coaching session, send an email to adifferenceforone@gmail.com.